Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining for today's webinar. My name is Kevin Marheine, and I am the Digital Marketing Specialist here at Coretek Services. And I'll be serving as your moderator for today's webinar. Today, I am joined by Clint Adkins, our Azure Practice Director. He'll be walking you through a presentation today looking at Azure migration strategies. But before I hand it over to Clint, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording today's webinar, so if you had registered and are unable to attend, you'll be able to check that on demand, or if you want to refer back to the presentation here today, we will be sending that out with the slide deck following the completion of today's webinar. So it usually goes out either this afternoon or tomorrow morning, depending on when GoToWebinar makes the recording available to us. Throughout the course of the webinar, if you do have any questions, please feel free to enter those in using the questions portion of the GoToWebinar interface. We usually have a time at the end to go over some quick Q&A, so just enter your questions in there, and then once Clint has had a chance to run through everything, I'll go ahead and unmute myself, and we'll ask him and get your answers. Without any further ado, Clint, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to walk through the presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you all for attending this today. What we're really trying to accomplish today is to go through what Coretek's 5 key steps to a successful Azure migration is. We've gone through a lot of different migrations, and what we want to do is share some of our success, as well as share some of our downfalls so that you don't fall into those as well. So whenever we really go through this today, our hope is to really answer how you can really get started and what the best process for migrating to Azure will be. So as we get started, we'll talk about some common terms within Azure migrations. Traditional data centers are where you completely manage the full stack, from network storage, servers, virtualization, operating system, all the way up to applications and data. As you start moving into Azure, there's a term called IaaS, or Infrastructure as a Service, where Microsoft Azure is managing the core networking, storage, servers, and virtualization, and then what you manage is the operating system and above. And whether you're doing that or you're leveraging a partner to do that, you still own making sure things are patched and running properly from an operating system perspective. But you don't manage any of the virtualization layer, the hypervisor layer, or storage layer. When you move into PaaS, or Platform as a Service, you're really focusing on managing the application and the data. And Microsoft in the Azure world manages all of the OS and all the runtimes and then the core application services. You just run your application to manage your data specifically. And then you move into like SaaS, or Software as a Service. And what that really is an end-to-end solution where you're just a consumer of the application. Good examples of that are things like Office 365, on the LinkedIn, on the personal front, Facebook, or other tools like that are really a SaaS provider overall. So these are just some common terms you'll hear throughout this webinar, and just wanted to make sure that everybody understood them as we go forward. So when you're looking at cloud migration strategies, there really are 4 primary strategies on how to approach a cloud migration. There's rehost, which is basically taking your infrastructure as is and moving it up into an IaaS, or infrastructure in Azure. There's refactoring, where you'll take pieces of your infrastructure and move them to PaaS services, or different containers, depending on the scenario, which we'll get into here in a little bit. Or you can look at completely re-architecting and redesigning how your application's written. And that falls into the rebuild as well. So really where we're going to focus today is mostly on the rehost, but we will get into some of the other ones, refactor, re-architect, and rebuild through our migration methodology, and when to leverage those. as you're starting to prepare for your migration, people, process, and technology is always the key. Make sure that your people are ready for the migration. Make sure they're enabled. We'll give you some tools and tips through this on how you can do that for setting up skilling to ensure your team is ready to support and engage in the solution long term. Going through processes and plannings, we'll tell you a little bit about how we do that and what our migration methodology is specifically, down to a weekly migration methodology. We use a 5-week methodology. And then technology, which technologies to use and how to design your environment. And just make sure you have a good foundation that way. Jumping into Coretek's migration methodology. So I mentioned we have a 5-step migration methodology. We go through assessment, plan, migrate, manage, then we optimize. So when you're looking at a cloud Azure migration and you're looking at a data center exit strategy, you really want to look at it as a rehost in most scenarios. There are a few exceptions to that, but as a general rule, you want to rehost your infrastructure and then optimize and modernize that into PaaS services at the end of the migration. And there's a lot of really good reasons, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So jumping into the assess phase, as you go through the assessment phase, really the core focus of that is setting yourself up for success and making sure, is this really the right decision for us? What are our motivations? Why are we really moving to the cloud? And understanding that and making sure that not just IT understands it, but the business understands it as well. Are we looking for a true data center exit? Are we looking for some sort of reduction of disruptions, like maybe some sort of stability? Or are we looking for scaling to meet different changes in the way we do business? Are we looking at cost savings? I mean, everyone's always looking at cost savings, but is that the primary real driver that you're trying to get out of it? Are you looking for innovation? Are you looking to be able to transform how you deliver your products and services to your customers? What's your real motivations? And then looking at why are you trying to, what are the outcomes you want? What do you actually want out of it? Do you want financial, agility, reach, engagement, performance? Those are all some examples. There are a lot of other ones out there also, but really understand not only why are you doing it, what's your motivations, but what are the outcomes you need out of it? And that's so critical, because then that way you can measure what does success really look like for your business. And that's really key to, foundationally, to understanding what's going on and what your approach, your true approach to the migration should be. As part of that assessment phase, one of the things you should really look at is what's called a Azure Economic Assessment. In Microsoft terms, it's also called a solution assessment as well. But ultimately what it is it's an analysis done in your environment that looks at your total infrastructure and applications and data, and looks at what is really ready to move up to the cloud as is, what would need to be remediated if you moved it up to the cloud, and then also what's the cost, what's the feasibility of it, what's right sizing your infrastructure look like if you have a couple hundred servers on-prem. Do you need that same size server infrastructure in the cloud? Most likely no. Most scenarios, people over-provision their infrastructure. And the reason why they over-provision their infrastructure is because they look at it as that they have it physically on site, on premise, or in their data center, and they're able to provision it. Well, in Azure, you pay differently, or any cloud for that matter, you pay differently based on the infrastructure and the amount of memory and amount of CPU and storage you have running in Azure. And so you really want to optimize that and make sure you're running your infrastructure at the right scale and the right size to meet performance needs, as well as balancing that with financials. And a good cloud economic assessment or Azure Economic Assessment will be able to provide that to you, and it'll give you that core roadmap of Should we be moving up to Azure based on those motivations and outcomes expected? Would this look correctly moving up to Azure for us? And you can make that decision at that point. Once you've made that total TCO evaluation and you understand that Azure meets your business objectives at the end of the day, then we move into the plan phase where we're really looking at a cloud adoption framework. This is a really well-built framework developed by Microsoft. You can find it at azure.com/CAF, which is a common term for Cloud Adoption Framework, CAF. And ultimately, you can see there's some similarities to that first phase we already went through with defining your strategy, understanding your motivations and your outcomes, prioritizing your projects and looking at it from that perspective, and then going into the plan and looking at your digital estate. Whenever we say digital estate, we're talking about what is your infrastructure, what is your apps, what is your applications, what does your data look like? How does that holistically look for you as an organization? In the plan phase, it's really important to make sure that your organization is set up properly. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the manage phase. Your skills readiness plan, you actually have a skills readiness plan, a cloud adoption plan. So what are the exact workloads you guys are looking at migrating and when, or servers, or however you're going to slice and dice that migration. There's some really good templates out there on the azure.com/CAF website for you to use for these different key areas of readiness, a skills readiness plan, a cloud adoption plan, motivations, documentation, things like that. Then you move into the ready phase, and the ready phase is really about designing and building your core Azure infrastructure to support you for long-term growth and whatever the workloads that you're planning on migrating are immediately. So whenever we go through it, we really look at it, we call it Cloud Foundation, specifically in the Coretek world. And ultimately what it is it's designing what does your subscriptions look like, what do your networks look like, how are you connecting to the Azure environment? What does your identity look like from an Azure AD perspective? Are you going to use your standard Azure, your standard Active Directory authentication connected to Azure AD? Are you going to use a separate identity altogether? There are reasons to do both depending on the scenario, but just making sure you're designing that for long-term success. What's your governance and your tagging plan so you can understand what resources are being utilized by which application or department, or however you want to look at that from a governance perspective. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then you go into the adoption. Again, it's about migrating your workloads and getting set up. How are you going to do that? And then the CAF framework covers governance and manage as well. A lot of really good material out there for you. That's definitely important to do. Part of just jumping back real quick to the ready phase and the cloud foundations, one of the key things is to have an actual documented design on what you want your Azure environment to look like. It doesn't need to be overly complex or overly fancy. It just needs to be well documented and understood of what your IP scheme is and what your networking standards are and your naming standards and your and really understanding what that Azure environment should look like, what your connectivity is, what your security plan is. Then we go into the migrate phase. So we leverage Azure Site Recovery, which is Microsoft's backup tool that copies bit by bit the infrastructure and data up to Azure and can keep it synchronized. We use that because we built a lot of scripts around it and tools that will help us automate deployments. But you can use ASR, or you can leverage a tool called Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate's both are free tools from Microsoft. Azure Migrate has really come a long way over the past couple of years, and probably is what we would use if we hadn't already built all the different automation and tool sets we have around ASR. So if you're just getting started, definitely recommend leveraging Azure Migrate. It will help you through that migration of server by server in a rehost fashion from on-prem into Azure. If you are going the PaaS route and you're looking at it, some low-hanging fruit is leveraging the database migration service, DMS, for SQL services. And what that can do is that can help you migrate PaaS services or platform services, platform as a service, to SQL. And you can either do it to an Azure SQL instance or an Azure SQL managed instance. It's really up to you on what you want to use, and there's a lot of different evaluations and reasons behind using each, and compatibility with your existing database and functionality. So that tool will tell you if it's compatible and what needs to be remediated. And in some cases, it just doesn't make sense to move to a PaaS service right away. You may want to look at that later after you're already in Azure. As we've talked about, we really focus on this rehost methodology. And what's really good about it is you just get your infrastructure from on-prem up into Azure in an easy, simplified, low-risk manner. One of the great things about Azure is you can also failover test before you actually do the cutover. So there's a lot of backup plans, and it's a really good tool and good way for you to migrate. It's very reliable and very low risk overall. So Coretek leverages a 5-week migration process. So once we're in the actual migration phase, we leverage a 5-week process. We call it T-3, T-2, T-1, T-0, and then T+1. T-0 is the actual go live migration week. And this can vary depending on your organization. But what's great about this is you can group applications and server infrastructure together by different groups, and you can have them running in parallel. So you can have multiple different migration groups running at once so that you can continuously migrate, again, depending on how much infrastructure you have over time, but securely and methodically to ensure that you actually are following proper processes and doing things like really truly testing your failover beforehand, making sure there's any remediations needed, it's remediated before the time to actually cut over, submitting change controls, any sort of firewall and network changes and things like that. We also look at a T+1 where you're providing ongoing support and really making sure that everything's set up properly for that new infrastructure that's up in Azure. So what can really move to Azure? Really a lot of applications, most applications can move into the cloud. Now, you do have to evaluate and understand, does it make sense to move a particular workload into Azure? But most line of business applications can move into Azure overall. If it can run on-prem in an infrastructure, there's a really high likelihood it can run in Azure. There are some exceptions to that, like you wouldn't want to run Microsoft Exchange up in Azure, most likely. I think I've heard that has been done before, but I wouldn't necessarily do that. I would move to a SaaS solution like a Office 365 or something along those lines. Most applications, if they can run on a virtual server in a data center, they can run in Azure. The questions that you do have to remediate are things like connectivity, if there's any connectivity issues, or things like speed of the application functioning. And all of that should be handled during that initial assessment phase, that cloud economic assessment phase will really tell you whether you're going to have issues with that kind of stuff. As we continue down the migration, you go into a true management where you're really looking at ensuring that you're managing, monitoring, and everything's like really well handled from an organization perspective, looking at setting up ITIL-based service delivery. So it is a good opportunity for you to reset some of your standards and some of your processes, like your change management process, really looking at what should it be going forward. What's my SLA process? How do I manage SLAs? It's a good opportunity for you to reset some of those kind of things. One of the key things to do during that managing phase is setting up a cloud center of excellence. There's a lot of good information out there about it. But the gist is having different people from within your organization helping to set standards and direction from a cloud perspective to ensure that your business is truly getting the value out of Azure that you want it to get. As you continue to go down the manage piece, one of the key things people struggle with is governance and really getting their hands around it and understanding it. We have a great webinar that Robert Lovelace had done that's available at coretek.com/videos. And it's specifically around governance. And ultimately, when you're looking at governance, there are 5 disciplines of it: cost management, security baseline, resource consistency, identity baseline, and then deployment acceleration, and really defining how are you managing, how are you deploying assets and policies, and what do you need? How do you identify what type of identity do you want to use? How do you want to authenticate to your applications? What tools are available for monitoring and overall management and ensuring that you have consistent delivery methods? What's your security plan and how are you managing that? And then cost, how do you track your cost management? There's a lot of great tools out there from cost management and security and overall governance. Coretek leverages an in-house tool built called Coretek AMS, Azure Management Suite. But there are a lot of great tools out there. Microsoft has a lot that are available just as part of portal.azure.com as part of the standard Azure platform to help you with this. As we continue down the methodology into the optimization phase, so now you have all of your infrastructure up in Azure or a portion of your infrastructure up in Azure. Now you want to continuously optimize that infrastructure from a performance perspective and cost perspective, but also looking at really modernizing the applications. So how do we get rid of servers overall? And that's where you then start looking at what servers could be migrated from IaaS or infrastructure service to PaaS services, because really the idea is in the cloud world, you want to try to get rid of servers if at all possible, just so you don't have to manage those potential failure points and allow you to really focus on the business, on your business and what you're trying to accomplish as a whole. And not have to worry about managing infrastructure and patching servers and things like that. So app modernization is a great way to go and a great way to look at it. A lot of vendors do support leveraging PaaS services. Also, I've seen a lot of organizations start putting in their procurement processes as they're purchasing new applications from vendors, requiring contractually those vendors to have PaaS supportability. Now, obviously, businesses, the business side may trump that and say, oh, well, we don't need that for various reasons. We really need an application. But if you, from an IT perspective, are able to at least drive that there, it'll help simplify your life in the long run, planning 5 years out plus. We use a tool called UnifyCloud or CloudPilot specifically for analyzing applications. If you build applications in-house, it's a great tool for actually looking at the code and looking at what really needs to be changed, as well as what the work effort estimate would be to actually migrate that code and put it into a PaaS service instead of a traditional IaaS service. Definitely a great tool overall for you to use. And ultimately, how do you get started? So reach out to Coretek if you'd like more advice, or if you have any direct questions, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Clint Adkins. Happy to answer any questions. Connect with me, private message me, and I'll be glad to respond to you. We definitely have some proven methodologies that can help you accelerate your migration. Overall, we would like to help you if there's anything you need. Also, we have a free strategy white paper that kind of outlines our 5 key steps. We'll be sending that out as well as part of the recording to you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And Kevin, are there any questions out there?
Yeah, we do have a couple here. The first one is just around like the timeline. So say someone is interested in doing, exploring the Azure migration. What sort of timeline are they looking at in terms of, how fast can we get working with them?
Yeah, great question, Kevin. So from a timeline perspective, it really varies depending on the size of the organization and complexity of the organization. Smaller organizations with maybe 50, 100 servers, somewhere in that range, can get migrated into Azure fairly quickly. I've seen companies get migrated in as little as 3 months, and I've seen companies take 6 to 9 months. It really depends on your organization. Larger organizations definitely is more complex and needs to be evaluated. Generally, you're looking at a year plus for larger environments. Now, that's not a year plus of dedicated resources, but the duration is in that range.
Great. Another question here is, how are we addressing the pitfalls of the network/connectivity/infrastructure issues? And what assessments are we doing for that?
Yeah, great question. So whenever we're designing and going through an economic assessment, we really try to look at what the actual bandwidth is needed per server and infrastructure to be able to look at it, and then evaluate what the customer has as well. We also know that there are some common pitfalls with things like file shares and way applications specifically work. And we're able to address those and have pieces of infrastructure still on-prem. In larger enterprises, most are really hybrid connectivity and hybrid infrastructure overall, and has to be addressed. There's a lot of great tools out there. You can use ExpressRoute if you really have some latency concerns and required specific bandwidth requirements, or something like an SD-WAN tool set to help speed up some of that connectivity. So there's definitely a lot of options that would definitely be covered during your CAF, your Cloud Adoption Framework, and specifically the Cloud Foundation side on how to address those specific things.
Great. Those are the 2 questions that I currently see in chat. I'll keep an eye on it to see. I know we're coming up here against the 2:30 mark, so but we'll see if any last minute question comes trickling in. But I just want to thank everyone for their time. Clint, thank you for walking us through the presentation today. We will be sending out today's recording so that you can refer back to it, or if you were unable to join today during the live webinar, you'll be able to check it out on demand. And as Clint mentioned, we'll also be sending over the slide deck, which not only includes all the material that Clint walked us through today, but it does also include the link to the Azure Migration Strategy white paper, and some other helpful links as well, including ways to get in contact with us here at Coretek, or to link up specifically with Clint. So it doesn't look like any other questions have come. Oh, wait, there might be one more. The window is very small. So Bill, taking a look here at your question around around the connectivity piece, we will look to get someone connected with you specifically to address that question offline, and we'll make the connections there for you. So with that handled, I think we're good here today. Again, thank everybody for tuning in. We'll be sending out the recording. We do have our regular Tech Tuesday webinar schedule. Will be resumed next Tuesday, and we'll be having one focused on Nasuni cloud storage. So if you haven't seen an invite already for that, those will be going out as well. And that will be with our director of our hybrid practice, Ryan Hinkleman. He'll also be joined by Glenn Davis, one of our solution architects, and they'll be taking a look at that Nasuni cloud storage and what that might be able to do for your organization. So if you are interested, those registrations are live. You can either check our social media, or again, we'll be sending out additional invites for that as well. But that'll do it for today's webinar. Again, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you during the next one. Thank you and have a fantastic afternoon.
All right, thank you, everybody.